This is independent geopolitical analysis and personal opinion only. All information is based on publicly available reports. I could be wrong. Russia has one of the largest naval forces in the world, hundreds of ships, decades of investment, a fleet that was supposed to project power across the Black Sea and beyond, and yet over the past 2 years, Ukraine, a country with no navy, has managed to sink, damage, or force into retreat a significant portion of that fleet. How is that possible? And more importantly, why does almost nobody understand how it actually happened? Because the story most people heard was about drones, small, cheap, fast drones skimming across the water, and yes, that is part of it. But the deeper story is about something far more strategic. It is about how Ukraine turned Russia's own defensive logic against itself. It is about how hiding a fleet can become the very thing that destroys it. So the real question is not how Ukraine built sea drones. The question is how Putin's decision to protect his ships created the conditions for a death trap. This is independent geopolitical analysis and personal opinion only. All information is based on publicly available reports. I could be wrong. To understand what happened, we need to go back to the beginning of the war, specifically to what happened in April 2022. According to publicly available reports from the Ukrainian military and multiple Western defense publications, Ukraine sank the Moskva, the flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, using Neptune anti-ship missiles. This was not just a military embarrassment, it was a strategic earthquake. The Moskva was the most powerful surface warship in the Black Sea. Losing it forced Russia to completely rethink how it was using its naval assets. Before the Moskva sinking, Russian warships were operating relatively openly. They were launching cruise missiles, providing fire support, and operating across the northwestern Black Sea with a degree of confidence. After April 2022, that confidence collapsed. Russia began pulling its fleet back. Ships were repositioned further east, away from Ukrainian coastal defenses. The main base at Sevastopol in occupied Crimea became both a refuge and, as events would later prove, a liability. According to reports from the Royal United Services Institute and other open-source defense analysts, Russia invested heavily in air defense systems around Sevastopol and other Crimean ports. The idea was straightforward: keep the ships close to protected infrastructure, use layered air defenses to protect them from missile and drone attacks, concentrate the fleet so it could be guarded more efficiently. On paper, it was a reasonable response to a real threat. In practice, it became one of the most consequential strategic miscalculations of the entire war. Here is what I think is really happening. When Russia concentrated its Black Sea Fleet in Crimean ports under heavy air defense cover, it was operating from a Cold War-era logic. The assumption was that the primary threat to a naval fleet comes from the air or from other warships. You protect against air threats with air defense systems. You protect against surface threats by staying out of range. What Russian military planners did not adequately account for was a threat that moves on the surface of the water, is small enough to avoid radar detection, cheap enough to deploy in large numbers, and expendable enough that losing one means almost nothing. Ukraine's sea drone program, known broadly around the Magura V5 and earlier prototypes, exploited every single one of those blind spots simultaneously. According to reporting from Reuters, the Financial Times, and Ukrainian Defense Ministry statements, Ukraine began developing uncrewed surface vehicles, essentially naval drones, after losing access to its conventional navy early in the war. These are not submarines. They are not missiles in the traditional sense. They ride on the surface of the water. They are fast, relatively low profile, and they can be guided remotely over significant distances. The critical insight here is this: Russia's air defense systems, even sophisticated ones, are optimized to detect and intercept things coming from above. Radar systems are angled upward. Missile batteries are designed to engage aerial targets. A small, fast boat-shaped drone moving at surface level in choppy Black Sea water at night is an entirely different problem. It is not that Russia had no capability to counter these drones. It is that its defenses were architecturally designed for a different type of threat. Ukraine found the gap between what Russia built and what was actually coming. But here is where it gets interesting. The concentration of the fleet, which was supposed to protect it, actually made the targeting problem easier for Ukraine, not harder. When you scatter assets across a wide geographic area, an attacker has to make choices. They have to prioritize. They have limited intelligence and limited strike capacity. But when a defender concentrates their most valuable assets in a small number of locations, they are essentially doing the attacker's targeting work for them. Sevastopol became a known location. The ships inside it became known targets. The approach routes into the harbor became predictable choke points and Ukrainian drone Operators, according to multiple open-source analysts tracking the conflict, learned those patterns over months of observation. This is not a new concept in military history. Concentration of force is a fundamental principle of warfare, but it carries a risk that is often underestimated. When you concentrate, you also concentrate your vulnerability. The Romans understood this. Naval commanders in World War II understood this. What makes the Black Sea situation unique is the technology involved, because the tool Ukraine used to exploit that concentration was not a carrier group or a missile salvo. It was a relatively simple, commercially influenced unmanned surface vehicle that cost a fraction of what it was destroying. Most people are missing this part of the story. The economic dimension of what Ukraine accomplished is arguably more significant than the tactical dimension. According to estimates published by open-source defense analyst Oryx, which tracks equipment losses using photographic confirmation, Russia has lost multiple large surface combatants, landing ships, and support vessels in the Black Sea since the war began. Each of these ships represents hundreds of millions of dollars in value, years of construction, and irreplaceable strategic capability in the short term. Ukraine's sea drones, by contrast, cost somewhere in the range of hundreds of thousands of dollars per unit, possibly less for earlier versions. The exchange ratio is devastating for Russia. And this matters beyond the Black Sea. What Ukraine demonstrated, whether intentionally or as an improvised response to necessity, is a new template for asymmetric naval warfare. A country without a navy, facing a country with a significant navy, used cheap autonomous or semi-autonomous surface vehicles to neutralize that advantage. This has implications that defense establishments around the world are currently studying very carefully, but we will come back to that. Let us return to the specific tactical evolution that made this campaign so effective. According to Ukrainian officials and reporting from Defense Express and other Ukrainian defense media, the drone operations were not random. They were iterative. Early drone attacks probed Russian defenses. They identified where radar coverage was weakest. They found the gaps in patrol boat activity. They tested response times. Over a series of attacks, Ukrainian operators built a detailed picture of Russian defensive behavior around Crimean ports, and then they adjusted. This is what military analysts call an adaptive adversary cycle. You attack, you observe the response, you update your approach, and you attack again with better information. Russia, facing a threat it had not fully anticipated and did not have a clean doctrinal answer for, was essentially being used as a source of intelligence by the very act of defending itself. Every time Russian forces fired at a drone, or moved a patrol boat, or changed a radar angle, they were potentially providing information about their defensive architecture. There is also a psychological dimension here that should not be underestimated. The port of Sevastopol is not just a military installation. It is a symbol. Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 was, in part, about securing that port. The Black Sea Fleet and its home at Sevastopol are woven into Russian national identity in a way that goes beyond strategic calculation. When Ukraine struck ships there, it was not just destroying military hardware. It was striking at something Russia considered untouchable. The political cost inside Russia of visibly losing ships in the symbolic heart of its naval power is difficult to quantify but almost certainly significant. According to reporting from the Kyiv Independent and multiple Western news agencies, Russia eventually began moving some of its most valuable remaining Black Sea Fleet assets out of Crimea entirely, repositioning them to Novorossiysk on the Russian mainland. This is, from one angle, a sensible defensive measure. From another angle, it is an extraordinary admission. Russia moved its fleet away from its primary naval base because that base was no longer safe. Ukraine, with no navy, had made Russia's primary Black Sea naval installation too dangerous for Russia's own ships to use comfortably. That is a strategic achievement that deserves to be stated clearly. Ukraine did not destroy the Black Sea Fleet in total, but it fundamentally altered the strategic calculus of the entire region. Russian surface ships can no longer operate freely in the western Black Sea. They cannot credibly threaten the Ukrainian coastline or conduct amphibious operations in the way they could in February 2022. The threat of naval landing operations, which loomed large in the early weeks of the war, has effectively evaporated, and the grain corridor that Ukraine eventually used to export food through the Black Sea, despite Russian objections, became possible in part because Russia's surface fleet was no longer in a position to enforce a close naval blockade reliably. This is where the strategic picture becomes even more layered. Russia's retreat and repositioning of its fleet to Novorossiysk did not end Ukraine's drone campaign. It relocated the problem. Reports from late 2023 and into 2024 indicate that Ukrainian sea drones reached Novorossiysk and struck vessels there as well. According to reporting from the BBC and Reuters, this included attacks on the Crimean Bridge and approaches to mainland Russian ports. The range of Ukraine's sea drone operations expanded as the technology and operational experience developed. Russia had moved its fleet to escape the threat, and the threat followed. This brings us to what happens next, and here I want to be careful to distinguish between what we know and what is reasonable to expect based on current trajectories. The first likely development is continued Ukrainian investment in sea drone capability. This program has proven its value beyond almost any other Ukrainian military innovation. It is cost-effective, it is operationally successful, and it has drawn significant international interest, which likely translates into both funding and technical assistance. There is no reason to expect Ukraine will slow this program down. The more likely trajectory is further development, including potentially greater range, improved stealth characteristics, and possibly more sophisticated autonomous targeting systems. The second development to watch is Russian adaptation. Russia has not been static in responding to this threat. According to defense reporting, Russia has deployed additional patrol boats, experimented with different radar configurations, and attempted to establish better surface surveillance around its ports. The question is whether Russia can close the defensive gaps faster than Ukraine can find new ones. Based on the track record so far, Ukraine has maintained the initiative in this particular domain, but that is not guaranteed to continue indefinitely. The third dimension, which may be the most consequential in the long run, is the international implications. Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and several NATO members with significant coastlines are all paying close attention to what Ukraine has demonstrated, the model of a smaller, outgunned actor using cheap autonomous surface vehicles to neutralize a larger conventional navy has fundamentally changed the risk calculus for naval operations in contested waters globally. We are likely in the early stages of a significant shift in how navies around the world think about force protection, port security, and the role of unmanned surface vehicles both offensively and defensively. If this analysis is correct, here are 2 or 3 things worth watching in the next 30 to 60 days. First, pay attention to the location of Russia's remaining major Black Sea Fleet assets. If there is a further repositioning, particularly of submarines or larger surface combatants, that signals Russia believes the threat environment has not stabilized and that Ukrainian drone capability continues to expand. Second, watch for any Ukrainian announcements or reporting around new drone variants. The Magura platform has been upgraded before. A significant capability announcement, longer range, improved sensors, or larger payload would suggest the campaign is entering a new phase. Third, watch how Western defense procurement discussions develop. If you begin to see NATO members or Indo-Pacific partners accelerating purchases or development programs for unmanned surface vehicles, that is the market signaling that the Black Sea lesson has been absorbed at the strategic planning level. This is independent analysis only, not news. I could be wrong, and I genuinely encourage you to read the underlying reports, check the sources, and form your own conclusions. The sources I have referenced throughout are publicly available from outlets including Reuters, the BBC, the Financial Times, Defense Express, Oryx, and the Royal United Services Institute. If you want geopolitical breakdowns that go beyond the headlines, beyond the narrative that most coverage defaults to, subscribe. And I am genuinely curious what your take is on this one. Do you think Russia can close the defensive gap? Do you think the sea drone model is transferable to other conflicts? Drop your analysis in the comments. All information in this video is based on publicly available reports and represents personal opinion and analysis only.